Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be tier ranking all of the new fantasy releases that I picked up within 2025. I will have a separate video where I tier rank all the new fantasy romance and romantasy books that I picked up in 2025, so if that sounds like something you are interested in, I'll have that video up very soon. Just jumping straight into this one though, there are going to be 18 different books that we're going to be tier ranking, and I'm borrowing the same blueprint I've created for previous tier rankings. I have 6 different tiers. 4, 5, and 6, the kind of quick way to summarize my feelings towards these books is that they didn't quite click with me, they didn't quite work for me, and also if I had a physical copy of the book, I would probably take it into my local bookstores, whereas tiers 1, 2, and 3, they worked with me on some levels, some more than others, and if I have a physical copy, I'm probably gonna keep it, or if I don't yet have one, and it's a first in series, for example, I'm probably interested enough to continue going and seeing what I think of the rest of it, but that's kind of a very quick summation of how the tiers work. So jumping straight into it, as usual, I'm going to start in the middle tiers and then branch my way into the extremes. If you're interested in more in-depth thoughts for a lot of these, I will have any videos I've done for them. If I haven't done more in-depth thoughts, I'll make sure to note that in the description bar so you're not kind of endlessly searching for certain ones. But finally getting into it, I'm going to start with tier 3. And I have a few different books in tier 3. There were a number of books this year that I thought, oh, I liked that well enough, but maybe didn't love it. And I think that's kind of a through line for not just myself, but it seems like a fairly consistent feeling for a lot of you as well, where maybe you're not finding the standouts as often as you would like, but you're maybe not despising a lot of what you're picking up either. And fantasy just kind of seems to be in this interesting place. I also will say I think there's a lot more genre benders these days, so fantasy books are kind of taking chances, especially now that you could say we've punted fantasy romance out and it's like, oh, it's its own thing now, so maybe other things like mystery, thriller, horror books, those kinds of blends with fantasy are starting to have a little bit more time in the sun, but they also maybe haven't found their place yet. And I think that's true of some of the ones in these middle tiers. So kicking it off, we have Snake Eater by T. Kingfisher. Snake Eater, not the strongest in my opinion from T. Kingfisher. She does have a way of writing that is very engaging. She also has quite amusing prose. Just sometimes the way she describes things is creative and not how I think most people would describe things. She also can't seem to resist including some form of animals in her books. So in this one there is a very precious dog in the book. I will say I really liked the dog in this. And even though we're utilizing horror components within this story, we do still have thematic things present for the character as well that are kind of diving into things a lot of us can relate to. I, however, felt like it did its job of telling a story and having all the pieces within it and keeping me flipping the page, but I wouldn't say I absolutely had to know what happened next at any given moment, and I don't think that the themes were done as well as they've been done in previous T. Kingfisher stories. It was fun enough. It was definitely a book that if it's a Friday night and you just feel like reading something that's slightly creepy, but maybe not too scary, I think this one serves that purpose quite well, but I don't think it was, for me anyway, it wasn't an outstanding work of fiction. We also have Brigands and Breadknives. I think of the 3 Travis Baldree books that I have read at this point, this one was probably my least favorite. I do quite like Viv, and we are straying from Viv's story within this one, and we are following someone else, and I liked the thematic elements that were tackled in this. I also appreciated that we weren't afraid to show how difficult the thematic element we are actually depicting in this, how challenging it can actually be, because the story doesn't almost go the way you want it to, and that's almost sort of the point. However, I just found that I think I have preferred actually in the other 2 when Travis Baldree kind of has a setting that we're primarily sticking to. I think the atmosphere shines a lot more in that way, and this one was a little bit more of a traveling story than the previous ones have been, and I think it just kind of felt meandering as a result, and that does speak to the point of the story because the character is kind of trying to find themselves and their new place in life and their new purpose, and they are questioning a lot of things, and so it makes sense that while they're doing that, they are literally also traipsing about, just trying to figure things out, and there is this meandering nature present in the actual literal movement of the character. However, it just, I don't think, was quite as strong as the previous 2. We also have another T. Kingfisher, unfortunately, which would be Hemlock and Silver. I say unfortunately like it's a terrible thing, and it's not, because I liked these books in this tier, but in previous years, T. Kingfisher has really shined for me, and this year it was kind of just okay. And maybe if I'm, trying to challenge myself and question myself, maybe I'm holding T. Kingfisher to too high of a standard because I expect everything to be just as good as the favorites that I've picked up by this author. But I don't think so. I think that both of these just maybe writing-wise weren't quite as strong. Hemlock and Silver in particular, I thought leaned a little bit too much into some repetition for the sake of developing the character, and that is not my favorite means of character development. This was more so true, I would say, within the dialogue. I still liked this one. I would say I liked this one more than Snake Eater, but these are just, for me, not the strongest of T. Kingfisher's works. And then the last two for this, we have The Floating World and Ambessa, Chosen of the Wolf. Ambessa being the character from the very well-known and loved Arcane, of which I am one of those people that really loves that show. And you get a little bit more about Ambessa's past. No, unfortunately, you don't get more of the Black Rose, or as much as maybe a lot of us were hoping. But I did enjoy the story. It just kind of felt like a classic, cool fantasy standalone where it's kind of edge of your seat. There's a lot of scheming and morally gray characters and fighting. And I enjoyed it for what it was. I don't think it is necessarily an all-time favorite. I mean, obviously, I'm putting it in this third tier, but it's not, it didn't impact me. It didn't hit me. I thought it was really good as kind of a show tie-in, kind of a story. And also, I thought it served as a standalone quite well, an action-adventure, political scheming kind of story. And there were some fun twists and turns throughout, but nothing that really, really struck me and hit me, but would still recommend, and I did enjoy. And then The Floating World, I still need to read its sequel. Its sequel recently came out, and I still need to pick it up. So this is a first in a duology. And I like the characters. I really like the world. I liked the emphasis on how much these characters really care about their families, and how that, I think, raises the stakes quite a bit. But I wasn't as invested as maybe I was hoping. And I think something like The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, it just had this sort of whimsical nature to it that I really loved. And this one, it didn't have that quite as much. And I really liked that in this author's other work. And I think maybe I was craving that a little bit. And without that, I think I don't necessarily need to have the whimsical nature again. But then I would hope to be really connected with the characters, or that I would be so invested in the plot, and I don't know that I was as much as I maybe have been for the ones that are in the higher tiers here today. So I liked it. Maybe some of my feelings will change slightly when I pick up the sequel, but for now, this first book is just kind of I enjoyed that. Jumping now to tier 4, and also I'm going to go to tier 5, as there's only one book in each of these tiers. So for tier 4, we have The Bewitching by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and this is a book that I think a lot of people would consider horror as well, but there were pieces of this that still, I think, fall under the umbrella, the big umbrella of fantasy, as there were some witches within this story. And you do go back and forth between a few different plot lines, and these plot lines exist at different times, and then you're kind of seeing how it all connects. I think that one aspect of this that I want to compliment is that I was intrigued throughout the course of this story, and I definitely think that the author leaned into manipulation and things that were somewhat grotesque, more so in how they made you feel, as opposed to like overt grotesque things right in front of you. But there is this kind of lingering dread as you read through the story. So I appreciate all of those things. Characters and the plot, neither of them necessarily were standouts for me. It's not like I was so invested in these characters and I didn't really care that much if the plot shined because these characters are just so great. I didn't have that feeling, and I also didn't have the feeling of, okay, well, the characters are maybe just there, they're pieces on the board, but this plot is so creative and so interesting and so edge of your seat. I didn't have that feeling either. So it was both just kind of, they both served their purpose of making me want to turn the page, but I ultimately wasn't caring all that much in either direction, plot or characters. And the themes I felt like were fine. The writing was fine. Everything was just kind of fine for me with this one. I definitely would read something else by this author, and I'm very curious to see what I think of the others, because I think that there could be something similar to with T. Kingfisher, where some of them are standouts for me and then other ones maybe aren't as strong. I know this author has written a lot of work, so maybe I just happened to start with one that I didn't connect with as strongly, but overall this one was just okay for me, but definitely did its job in intriguing me, and not only intriguing me within the course of this story, but making me want to read other things by this author. And then as for, oh no, probably one of the most controversial books to have in a lower tier for today, But in tier 5, we have the Raven Scholar. I was very, very invested early on. I thought the world building was really cool, and it had that feeling of like, oh, we're back with the lore heavy worlds, and you've got the lore, and then you've got present day, and you're trying to figure out how these are going to impact each other. What's true from before? What's a lie? And also there's some things that happen in between lore type of history timeline and present day. There's a section at the beginning that kind of connects this, and all those questions that I was just describing of where's the truth in this, where's the lie, what actually happened, that's true in that piece as well. But then once we're settled into present day, the sort of murder mystery component to the story, the trials plotline, the almost school-like plotline, I did not necessarily love the tone of the story and the way that the plot was progressing. It just felt like we were trying to consistently trump the previous reveal, and also we were constantly trying to make you second guess everything. But I wasn't that into it because I felt like everybody behaved kind of stupidly. These characters all behaved much younger than they actually are. Every single one of them. Some of them more than others, but I just felt like everybody acted really young, and I'm like, these characters are in their 30s, late 20s, some of them, but a lot of them are in their 30s. They have kids, some of them, and I think that there was a tonal aspect to it that didn't click with me. I think the same story, but maybe either really leaning into the camp, or maybe something that was taking itself a little bit more seriously, or had characters that I really found more endearing and I connected with more. I think if it was been one of those two options, maybe would have worked for me. And I've articulated in the past that camp factor within stories, if it's not enough, then it makes the serious moments feel weird because you're just like, what? Like, it just kind of feels off. And then if it's too much, then you're like, okay, I get it. You get fatigued, and it can just kind of wear the story down, and it can feel repetitive. And so finding that perfect balance of the right amount of camp and also the right amount of heart, I'll call it, is really, I'm very, very picky about that. It is consistent for me over the last few years. I mean, anytime I bring up any story that has some camp factor to it, getting that perfect amount is a challenge. And this one, unfortunately, didn't have that perfect amount. And when it doesn't have that perfect amount, it's not just like, oh, this was okay. It usually ends up being a miss. So that is, I would say, the main reason why this one is in tier 5 for me, unfortunately. Now jumping up to tier 2, I actually have a lot in tier 2. Drop of Corruption, The Summer War, Birth of a Dynasty, Engines of War, A Forgery of Fate, Grave Empire, and Greenteeth. I really liked so many of these, so you've probably heard me talk about them before. Greenteeth felt like a classic fairy tale, but also with a great friendship at the core of it, so I really, really loved that. Grave Empire, such a great example of eldritch horror. A story that if it was sold in the horror section, I wouldn't even question it. I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. And it takes a little while to build, but just that small, a little bit of something creepy, a little bit of something disturbing. You have a character starting to pursue a path that you're like, oh, I don't know, I don't like this. And the more that it builds and builds and builds, and then you just have this climactic, intense moment, and you're like, oh, but this is only the first in this story, and what's going to happen next? I thought it was so good, and I was so intrigued the whole time. A Forgery of Fate was just so much fun. I feel like Elizabeth Lim is kind of a go-to author for me. If I just want this kind of fun YA fantasy that just feels so whimsical, feels kind of like lighthearted, but there are stakes, and they've got a family they care about, or they have people in their lives that they love and that they want to try to ensure are safe and do what they can to help them and protect them. And it has like a Mulan quality to it. Mulan as in the cartoon from years ago that I think was a movie a lot of us, I don't know, maybe that's not true, but I know for myself, I loved Mulan. And that feeling you have while watching, I'm not saying the plot is the same, but that feeling you have while watching that movie, I feel like is very true of a lot of Elizabeth Lim's works. She just kind of has rootable and very charismatic characters, or at the very least characters with a lot of personality. She tends to have those in hers, like Six Crimson Cranes is another example. And it was just fun. It was just a fun time, and it made me happy. And then Engines of War, not a fun time, an action-packed time, a battle-heavy time. This is the conclusion to this particular trilogy, and I just think this world is so cool. The backstabbing, the twists and turns, and the constant questioning of if someone is going to backstab somebody, or are they going to ally with somebody, and what is going to happen here as we have everything coming to a head. I thought that this final book in this trilogy was done really well. I think the second book is still maybe my favorite. I liked the expansion of the guilds, the expansion of the perspectives. This one was kind of a lot of action. Something similar would be like within the Bloodsworn Saga, the last book in that trilogy, I think had a similar feel of Race to the Finish Line. This one I think I was a little bit more, it had some slower moments. I think truly the John Gwyn one had a Race to the Finish Line feel from start to finish for the most part, whereas this one, I think we kind of had it was kind of consistently building, but we had our dips where we had time to settle a little bit. But in general, I think this world is so cool. Awesome epic fantasy. Awesome, I think, is a good word to describe this trilogy. Birth of a Dynasty, such a great first entry into a series. Can't wait for what happens next. I truly don't know what's going to happen with these characters. I found this to be one of the most brutal stories that I read this year, and brutal right from page one. It's very cutthroat. Also, the lore is really interesting, and kind of this question of, is magic returning in certain ways? Because it's still present, but you're like, how is magic here? And is it going to be like it was in the stories, or is it going to remain how it is now? And is there truth or is there lies within this and this prophecy that you have, and how you're curious how everything's going to come together is just very, very fascinating. I can't wait for the sequel to that one. We also have The Summer War by Naomi Novik, and this one was very fairy tale feeling. I mentioned Greenteeth kind of feels like a fairy tale. The Summer War especially so. I think Naomi Novik just knows how to dial in to that feeling of you're being told this tale, and it feels like a fairy tale that was written a long time ago and you're reading it now, as opposed to it feels like it's written now but has that, it still kind of has it's giving you a taste of what fairy tales were like before. This one truly feels like it was written before. Like you would find it in a storybook filled with fairy tales. And I enjoyed it. The writing is very different than a lot of modern fantasy works. I thought how the story was executed was very different. And I appreciate that she wasn't afraid, I think, to just let this be sort of a novella and tell this story. We didn't need to have this huge epic. But it really spoke to that thing I think a lot of us have of that feeling of fantasy that just tells you this tale. I think that Summer War accomplished that great. And then A Drop of Corruption. I know this is one that a lot of people really like. I don't have to say too much about it. I think the world is so fascinating. I just can't wait to get through the whole trilogy so that eventually I can go back and reread it, and then all the things, I'm going to be able to appreciate it even more so on reread. Also, I think we're starting to get a little bit more of the characters. That's my one thing about this series, is that I wish we could get even more of them because of the murder mystery feel to this. The plot is constantly moving in a good way, but we can step back and get to know them a little bit more, have these conversations, or have introspection and reflection, those types of moments, and we get not as much of that as I tend to like, but still, the world is fantastic. I like the characters, and I can't wait for the third book in this series. Now for my least favorites and my favorites. So least favorites, I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. It just really didn't hit for me. I think it's a very specific kind of humor, and if it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit. And I don't dislike this kind of humor. I just think you have to use it in moderation, which I don't think Abercrombie did. Plus the plot I thought was fairly predictable, and the plot itself was repetitive. So there was a lot of components to this one that just ultimately didn't work. Isles of the Emberdark. I think that what I was talking about before with tone and camp factor, this one's not necessarily tone and camp. It's more just tone in thematic elements versus the way that it's written. The other one that would be in this spot would be The Art of Vanishing. This one, I just kind of came away from it feeling like it had it almost felt like it didn't know what it wanted to say, and I'm sure that's not true. If you were to ask the author, I'm sure they could articulate what their intention was behind it, the creative choices they made behind it, so I'm not saying that that is literally the case, but there were aspects to it that I would get pulled in by, and then we would go in a direction where suddenly it's like plot things happen, but kind of goofy plot things happen, and then it took me aback because I was like, oh, what? And it just kind of felt very odd. Like it was like multiple stories that could have all been really interesting and great stories on their own, but we kind of combined them, and by combining them, it sort of just fell through for me, unfortunately. But I would still check out something else by this author. And then the only book, I have one new release at the top, and the only one would be Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. Not going to work for everybody. There is a grittiness to this, a sinister nature to this, a dark nature to this. It it is not necessarily going to be everybody's cup of tea. You follow characters that are not very good people. The split timeline, while I thought was utilized fantastically, I think it's going to make it drag for some people, but I thought that the build was fantastic, the intrigue was fantastic, the way we utilize a certain component of fantasy within this, but we use it to tackle really heavy topics. And we also have themes that we're almost not expecting present within this. We tackle so much within this one book. I thought it was V.E. Schwab basically at her best. The writing was great. I thought this was fantastic. I think it's, of course we have conversations about is this overhyped or things like that, and it's all a matter of opinion, but when it comes to hyped books, for me, this one is one that I think deserves the hype. I thought it was very good, very well written, and I'm so excited to see what V.E. Schwab does next. And she had this kind of little cheeky response to somebody once where they're like, please tell me you're going to write more books that kind of follow this version of our world. And she had some like, you never know what grows in the midnight soil or something. I don't remember what she said, but something very like, wink, wink. And I was like, come on, you better be giving us more if you're going to tease us like this. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, that's a tier ranking of all of the new fantasy releases that I picked up within this year. As noted, I will have a separate video for the new fantasy romance and romantasy books that I picked up this year. I really had to separate them because some of the ones I really liked from fantasy, I mean, they would just immediately be out. Those other ones I would need more tiers, I think, but we'll get to that one soon. Thanks so much for watching though. Let me know what were your standout releases from this year. What are some that were standouts that I didn't pick up and that you feel like are underhyped and that people need to check out because they were just so good. If you are interested in more in-depth thoughts about any of these, if I have reviews, I'll have them linked. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll see you later. Bye.